So we're so honored and happy today to have Hananya, Naftali, who's been a good friend of many years. Hananya is a leading spokesman on behalf of Israel. Really, I'd say a social networking superstar, in my opinion, and also in the opinion of people in the government of Israel. So Prime Minister Netanyahu asked Hananya to join his staff several years ago, and Hananya helped him run several successful campaigns to remain Prime Minister. And now that Bibi is in the opposition, Hananya is still working with him. And we're going to ask, I know so many of you really want to know, how can we advocate better on behalf of Israel? How can we be a better voice for Israel in social networks and in our communities? And I can't think of a better person to help us understand those questions. So let's talk about your background for a minute. You've been on social network for many years. I believe it started when you were in the army, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. I started, it was during the Gaza war of 2014. I was in the armored corps in the Israeli army. I was frontline inside the Gaza Strip fighting Hamas. And whenever we would come back to Israel, I would open the news and I saw a lot of pro-Palestine rallies, anti-Israel. Israel is bashed for committing crimes against humanity, war crimes. And I was there. I was there on the ground, so I saw that it was blunt lies. So I decided that if
blunt lies, because you were actually fighting in a very pinpointed manner to take out Hamas and protect as many Palestinian civilian lives as possible, right?
Absolutely.
Which can be frustrating as a soldier, right?
Yeah.
You want to go in.
It was before we entered the Gaza Strip, they strictly told us that we are doing everything in our power to preserve the Palestinian human life, because they are not our enemy. They are not who we are fighting against. We are fighting against Hamas, the terror group. So I decided, after seeing all these lies against Israel, to stand up. My English wasn't perfect, still not perfect learning. My editing skills, my everything. I taught myself with God's help how to defend Israel in the best way that I see it. And that's how I started. I started, during the army, to tell the truth as it is from my perspective. No, not an organization's perspective, or no one told me what to say.
And this brings up the issue of disproportionality. Every time Israel, it's a cyclical thing. We get these rockets from Hamas in Gaza. We have to go in and take out Hamas. And everybody says, Israel's using disproportionate forces. And I say, yes, it is disproportionate, because Israel is trying to take out a terrorist organization while preserving Palestinian lives, and Hamas is trying to kill as many Israeli civilians as possible. That's disproportionate. Right?
Oh, yeah.
It's completely disproportionate, right?
Absolutely. I mean, what do they want us to do? Do they want us to apologize for being strong? Because we are no longer the underdog, but we shouldn't apologize for being strong. So what do they expect us to say? Oh, okay, Hamas, we'll give you an Iron Dome as well. Right. We'll give you a fighter jet if you want.
Right. And sure, for every Hamas militant we kill, you can kill one Israeli citizen. That would be proportional, right?
Yeah, but no word about the over 4,000 rockets that were launched against Israeli civilians. And not to talk about the misfired rockets that landed inside the Gaza Strip and caused a loss of life, including Palestinian children.
Palestinians, yeah.
You can Google this and learn.
Okay, so you were an army person. You were filming yourself and telling the world your story. How did you end up going from there to being the immediate advisor of the Prime Minister?
Wow, I'm very passionate about telling the story of Israel. So, in Israel we have this value that we call it chutzpah. It's very, very important, especially if you're in the business world and dealing with Israelis, to dare to succeed, dare to...
it's like audacity to something like that.
So it was a dream of mine to meet the Prime Minister of Israel back then, Benjamin Netanyahu, and to make a video with him, to ask this historic leader how to defend Israel, because he was the Israel ambassador to the UN, and he did a lot for Israel. So I contacted his spokesperson, and I said, hey, I want to make an interview with the Prime Minister. And who am I? I just had my pages on social media, and they were responding to me, and they said, actually, we were thinking about, doing the same thing. We were thinking about making a video with the two of you. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, so because I had the audacity to contact them and ask, and I got it. So I made a video with Netanyahu. I asked him how to defend Israel in the best possible way. And we discussed a lot of these principles that Netanyahu had told me. And long story short, after a few weeks, Netanyahu asked that I join the team. So I got a phone call from the spokesperson, from the advisors, and they asked me to join the team. And you can't say no to that, you know, when the prime minister calls. So yeah, ever since I've been by his side.
Yeah. It reminds me of a proverb that says, "Do you see a man who's diligent in his work, mehir b'malchato, he will stand before kings." And it's like you said, you're passionate. You know, when you're really passionate and you're consistent and you're diligent and you're out there working hard, at the end of the day, somebody's gonna notice. Yeah.
Just keep being passionate.
Beautiful story.
Yeah.
So let's start there for a minute and talk about apartheid. It seems like this, you know, this ugly head that keeps on rising up every few years. Somebody else will claim that Israel's an apartheid. Now it came from Amnesty International. They put out a very detailed report claiming that Israel's an apartheid. You and I know this is complete BS, right? And if you want to see an apartheid against the Palestinians, go to Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Egypt, where the Palestinian refugees and their 3 generations of descendants from 1948 still don't have citizenship, proper political rights, barred from working in 72 job categories, can't own land, purchase land, inherit land. That's an apartheid, right? But I want to throw a hypothesis at you, because this is a little bit complicated. What I see is, on one hand, you have the Palestinians and the Palestinian activists who say, we are a state. I'm talking about the West Bank, okay? Within Israel, there's no question that Muslims have rights. They sit in our highest courts. They sit now in our government, in our Knesset. They lead our biggest banks, right? Not talking about Israel, not talking about the Gaza Strip, because that's ruled by Hamas. No Jews there. Israel isn't claiming sovereignty there. West Bank. West Bank, you have Palestinians and Palestinian activists who say, this is a Palestinian state. So if it's a Palestinian state, how can that be an Israeli apartheid? That's one question, right?
Exactly.
Right? But there's another tricky issue, and that's that you have very right-wing Israelis that say, that's Israel. But wait a second, if that's Israel, then that does create a little bit of an issue, because you do have all these people without Israeli citizenship. So to me, it feels like we need to decide what we want to do with Judea and Samaria. And until we're sure what we want to do with Judea and Samaria, will it be Palestinian, will it be Israeli, this is going to be an issue that keeps on coming up. So how do we deal with it?
That's a question that I think the top leaders in Israel have been asking themselves for decades. But actually, there is apartheid. The real apartheid is against the citizens of Israel. Because I, an Israeli citizen, I cannot enter a city in Area A, a Palestinian city in Judea and Samaria. I can't enter Gaza, and yet Gazans are allowed to enter into Israel with the right documents. I recently visited the Hadassah Medical Center in Jerusalem, and I was astonished to see so many Palestinians from Gaza and other places in Judea and Samaria coming to Jerusalem, to Israel, to be treated, to receive life-saving surgeries and treatments by Israeli Jewish doctors. And I saw how Palestinian and Israeli doctors are working together in Hadassah. So to talk about apartheid is just absurd, because the life in Israel is amazing for Palestinians. And actually, if you want to support the Palestinian people, you should support Israel, the one country that actually helps Palestinian people more than their own leaders do. Because Palestinians, more than 100,000 Palestinians work in Israel. And a recent poll that was conducted by the Palestine Media News, something like that, found that 93% of the East Jerusalem residents prefer to be under the government of Israel rather than the Palestinian government. So don't ask us, ask the Palestinians what they prefer, and they will tell you. Because if Israel is an apartheid state, then why does the Palestinians, they prefer to be under Israeli authority?
Right. Well, this is why I love speaking with you. I love your ideas. I think you bring a very, very valid point that Jews are also prevented from going into Palestinian areas. Not only that, we're prevented from going on the Temple Mount, praying on the Temple Mount. Israeli says, "Oh, that's Israel. That's Jerusalem." right? And yet, in order to preserve security issues and the diplomatic issues and so on and so forth, we have restrictions. So it's a very tense conflict that's still existing, like an open sore. I think both parties are suffering, both parties have limitations, and I think that's a very good way to frame it, because you don't have a good guy and a bad guy, and you have an oppressor and a suffering people. Both people are suffering. Both people have restrictions, and that's a fantastic way to reframe it. Thank you for that. We tell the business community, and in particularly the business community that supports Israel, it's not a secret, many of our supporters, many of the members of the Arise Alliance are evangelical business people. I say investing in businesses, in Israeli businesses that employ Palestinians is the best thing you can do to advance peaceful coexistence, right? Because it's Jews and Arabs working together and putting food on each other's table in a very productive manner. And it's a beautiful thing. The worst thing you can do if you want to help the Palestinians is boycott Israeli companies. It's the worst thing.
Exactly. And last time we witnessed it, SodaStream had to close one of their branches, and Palestinians lost jobs. We've seen terrible videos of Palestinian employees crying.
The teacher in Israel will receive 5 times as much salary. So of course they're going to cry. That's their future, their children's future, the education of their children. Everybody wants to be employed in Israeli companies. There's no question.
And I have to point out that as an Israeli, I don't hate the Palestinian people. I love them. They're not my enemy. When you go to, there is this beach that I love in the Dead Sea, right next to Jericho, where you can see Jews and Palestinians swimming together. And I went there once and they invited me for coffee and we talked, and completely strangers. But this is the beauty of Israel. You can just meet people and talk about life. And at the end of the day, just like you said, both sides want to wake up in the morning, go to work, provide for their families, and come back safe and sound to spend time with your family and children.
I love that. I think in order to support Israel, you should not be anti-Palestinian. It seems like you would agree with me that, viciously attacking the Palestinians also isn't going to help Israel. And it's just not a right thing to do as a human being, right? And certainly as somebody who embraces, biblical faith and puts value in every human life. What are some other things that you've seen that are not helpful? Sometimes people want to help Israel. They're out there on social media, and trying to, combat claims and attacks against Israel. What are those things that you see that come up time and time again, where you just kind of say, "Oh my God, I wish people would be more wise in the way they communicate"?
Wow, a lot. First of all, I think that the number one thing that I would tell our friends from abroad is that let's acknowledge the fact that Israel is not a perfect country. But then show me a perfect country. No country is perfect. So it's totally reasonable that Israel is not perfect. We are humans. God is perfect. We are not. We're trying. Right. But yet to look at Israel with this magnifying glass and looking for blemishes, this is anti-Semitic. It's not criticism, because no country is perfect. So trying to portray Israel as perfect, that's not the best way. I think the best way, and that's how I've been doing it for many years, and I was able to reach millions of people with it. It's simply by telling a personal story, saying that maybe Israel is not perfect, but hey, look at what's happening. Look at how our soldiers are taking care of a Palestinian elderly that needs help.
I think that is so true. And I think, what came to mind immediately was, claims that Israel has racism. And I've actually seen people say there is no racism in Israel. It's like, come on. Wherever there are human beings, there's racism. Why? Because, if you come from an evolutionary perspective, maybe you say, well, we used to, be in tribes, and you were always wary of the other tribe and somebody that looks different or sounds different, and so we have that innate tendency to be wary, afraid, and sometimes look at other groups of people as less. And we all of us in our personalities need to fight that. So say there's no racism in Israel. First of all, scientifically, that's impossible, right? So claim, I think you're right, but that would be a specific claim, in my opinion, that comes up sometimes, which is not helpful. It's better to say, of course there's racism in Israel. It should there, we need to do everything we can to reduce it and to stop it and to not give it a voice, but it exists in every society, right?
Unfortunately.
Yeah, and as well as in the Palestinian Authority. I mean, it goes both directions, unfortunately, of course.
There's this famous phrase that I love to use, that you can attract more people with honey than vinegar. So, meaning to talk about the beauty of Israel, the positive side of Israel, rather than the conflict or something, or the negative things that are happening, and explaining them, which are important. But in general, people love positivity, because think about it. People have their own problems. People have their own things to worry about and daily challenges. So at the end of the day, when they want to be friends of Israel, I believe that it's good to strengthen them and to give them more energy with positive and positivity. I always address the negative, but I always make sure that I balance it with positivity. Because at the end of the day, I believe that if you want to help Israel, show the positive side of Israel, show the beauty of Israel. Because there are a lot of our enemies, they like to point out, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And then we find ourselves just defending. But take the offense. Call them, let's say, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, the AOC, the squad in the United States. If you want to attack them or anything, each to their own, but invite them to come to Israel. You're calling Israel racist, ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, committing crimes against humanity. Come to Israel. See the truth for yourself. Visit the Jaffa Street in Jerusalem and see how Muslims work there. They travel there. Yeah. We don't have separate roads for Palestinians and or Jews, in opposition to other countries, some of them in the Middle East, where there is an actual, separation. But in Israel, it's the one beacon of democracy.
Yeah.
If you want to, that's something that I heard from former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that he was telling this to a lot of people that wanted to invest, business people. Mm-hmm. He told them, if you want to invest in Israel, because Israel is the best, the best stock that you can invest in. Yeah. It's going to grow and it's going to give you back. So I think that's the beauty of Israel, that it's a diverse, democratic, liberal, pluralistic country.
Yeah,
that it's just worth investing in.
So I love that, and I want to say to our audience, if you care about Israel, if you really care about improving our diplomatic status, then make sure you take the Arise video. We do the featured businesses of the month. So
I watch it.
Right. So thank you. So watch it, share it, like it, spread the word. Israel is doing so much. When you say tell the good story about Israel, that's easy. Because all the innovation, Israel is leading the world. There's no question with innovation for good, which are companies that are coming up with technological solutions from pharma and water tech and agri-tech and in so many areas, food tech, making life better for human beings worldwide. And it's not just because we have such a great education system here, or we somehow have cracked the code on innovation. There's something very deep in the Israeli society and the Hebrew ethic, which puts high value on improving in saving human life and improving human lives. And I think that's an important story to tell. And so thank you for that encouragement. Yeah.
True. And I just have to add to that one of the reasons why the Israeli people are so innovative and blessing the world is because we are in this tiny land. We are short on natural resources, so we have to use our brains and we have to push forward. But moreover, if you want to defend Israel, this is something that former Prime Minister Netanyahu also have told me. If you want to defend Israel, just take the truth and put it out there. Right. It's not that complicated. We have been here for how long? 4,000 years.
Right.
if wherever you put a shovel here, you will find that Jewish history that proves our that we are indigenous to this land. So it's not that complicated, to be honest. It's the truth. We don't need to deal with distorting and to make up lies. The truth.
Right. Just
grab it and take it.
I love it. So some of the big takeaways, if I can kind of summarize our conversation till now, is don't be radical in your claims one way or the other. Be willing to admit that Israel isn't perfect. That Israel has problems. Put more focus on the positive story, and tell the truth. Right. What would you say are the main tools in your toolbox today? That or maybe the main tools in our toolbox tomorrow. What are those platforms that people that want to be a voice on Israel should get more engaged in, because the battle is raging there and we don't have enough voices there? Like what practically, where should I go today if I want to be a voice on behalf of Israel?
Be on social media. I think that social media today is this city center. Where people are coming from different parts of the world, different levels in life, and they just converse. And it's like in ancient Greece that if you yell, so your voice matters more. So social media has become this city center where people yell, argue, converse, partner. So I think that social media is vital in the fight against the Boycott Israel movement, against the lies, because over there you can change people's opinions. And moreover, follow the news. I like to read the Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, to get an idea of what's happening in Israel, and knowledge, because knowledge is strength.
Right.
And through knowledge you can defend Israel, not lack of knowledge. And it's because if you hear an opinion and base your opinion on somebody else's opinion, it's being like we talked about before, being a moon. Have your own opinion, build your opinion. And regarding my toolbox, it's in business you're not supposed to give out your secrets, right? But I will say that. Right, I'm making videos about Israel. I like to travel and talk.
So you put your videos on Facebook, YouTube. If people want to find your videos, where do they go to? They look for Hananya Naftali.
Yeah. Look Hananya Naftali on YouTube,
okay,
and you will be able to find it. And I believe that it's very important to be everywhere, because
Twitter. You're in Twitter.
Instagram.
What about TikTok?
TikTok as well, not dancing, but talking.
Because I feel like, okay, it's almost like this generational thing where like everybody on Facebook today, the one thing they have in common is the color of their hair, right?
Yeah.
Once you have a little more white over here like I do, but then the younger people are now migrating towards TikTok, right? So now we need more voices for Israel. And why not dance? You should dance on TikTok. That would be...
I should try, yeah. But yeah, no, I'm... Just like you said, people say that this world belongs to the younger generation, but actually, if you think about it, if you cannot learn from the one that's older than you, then you cannot inherit this world and the future, because there's so much to learn. We go to the Bible, we turn to the Bible to learn from much older prophets and leaders than us. So if you're not able to learn from people that are older than you, then you can't really make a difference. But yeah, regarding TikTok and stuff, a lot of people say that, social media is just a waste of time. It's burning my time. But actually, social media is like a deadly weapon, like a sword that you can use to cut through the lies.
Yeah.
Well, I also recently started my Patreon. So if you want to support me on there, because I really think that the world needs people that focus on defending and telling the truth about Israel and creating friends for Israel 24/7. So that's what I intend to do.
It's wonderful. I mean, to think that you can put something up there and have it be viewed by, your voice can be heard by millions of people in a matter of seconds. I mean, it's
this
pretty
helped
amazing.
me to get my job with Netanyahu.
I'm sure that's true. Yeah. So I want to start landing the airplane if we can. Many of our people are evangelical. Many of them are Christian. within the Christian world, it seems like or the evangelical world, there's kind of the fundamental camp that takes the Bible very literally and sees that what's happening now in Israel is a miracle of biblical proportions, which was eerily predicted with extreme accuracy by the Hebrew prophets, and there's excitement about that, and we just want to be connected to that, and then there's another camp which looks at the Bible not literally but liberally, and sees it more as allegory. And let's say the prophecy of the dry bones in Ezekiel 37 may or may not be regarding the nation of Israel, but it's regarding revival in New Jersey as well, or San Diego.
Amen. Sure.
Right. And then that camp tends to be less excited about the physical restoration of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. What do we do to speak to that camp? I mean, how can we soften, let's say, their attitude towards Israel and the criticisms that we hear within our churches?
I have to say that as a first of all, born again Israeli, but as a Jew who was born and raised in Israel, to me that was very surprising, because I believe that whenever I'm meeting a Christian from abroad, they're like my family, But then I came to a realization that there is actually, unfortunately, anti-Semitism has infiltrated some churches, and the anti-Israel ideology has also infiltrated some churches, perhaps this second camp. I would say that, let us all be reminded that God does not change. So if it says in the Bible that He chose the Israelites to serve Him and to be a light, then why would that change in our century? The Bible is the most relevant book of our times. So if you want to know about what's going to happen, what's happening, read your Bible, and while you're at it, you see the word Israel, Israel, Israel in every other page. So you have to be ignorant to not realize how important Israel is to God. And God does not change. And I think that we should be reminded of that.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And I want to encourage you, as things come up in the news and Israel's being attacked or challenged, maybe your friends ask you a difficult question. We talked about some of them today, about apartheid, about home demolitions and the security fence, whatever the issue might be. You're not sure how to respond. Go to Hananya Naftali, Google his name, find out how he's addressing his issues, because he has such a fantastic way of framing these questions and answers. And I think that you will be empowered to speak into your own community, to be a better voice on behalf of Israel. And remember to keep Hananya in your prayers. He's kind of on the front line and receiving a barrage of attacks himself sometimes. And we just want to thank you for your courage and say more power to you.
Yeah. Amen. Thank you.
My great-grandfather, Abraham Myers, was a Jewish businessman from Darmstadt, Germany. Unfortunately, Darmstadt was the first city that was boycotted by the Third Reich when they were calling to boycott all Jewish-owned businesses in order to cripple the economy of this community. We created a rise to make sure that will never happen again. As anti-Semitic voices are rising once again around the world, and there's even this insidious campaign calling to boycott Israel, boycott Israeli companies, to isolate our economy, we want to do the opposite. We invite you to join our alliance and to help us by standing against these lies, spreading the truth about Israel, combating anti-Semitism, and creating more connectedness between the Israeli economy and the international community, which will just create security for Israel's future. Please sign up today to become a member of the Arise Alliance. Thank you so much.